All right. Welcome to this week's edition of Under the Gold Dome. Again with us this week is Jason, Sharon, and Dre. And joining us this week, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself and the district that you represent. Go for it.
Thank you, Representative Bruce. My name is David Dreyer. I'm the state representative for House District 59. Starts in Ponce Highlands and Emmett Park. It runs down through South Atlanta, Lakewood Heights, Hateville, and East Point.
Okay. And today what we're going to do, we kind of ended the program last week a little abruptly, where Jason had asked a question and I kind of cut him off a little bit and said that we would come back and talk about it briefly this go around. And unfortunately, Howard couldn't join us this week, and so we want you to chime in, on this conversation as well. But the question came up because Representative Mosby had indicated that he supported the idea of arresting parents for crimes that their child committed. Is that accurate, what he basically was saying?
That's about right.
Okay, and you guys had a reaction to that, and I kind of cut off the reaction because I didn't want you to take up the whole program with just that one subject. So let's talk about that, for a minute, and then we can talk about the other topics that we need to talk about. You were getting ready to go after him, so what was your concern about what he said?
My concern was basically you take the parents out of the home, and if there's other kids in the home, then it's like, who's there to take care of them? Who's there to pay the bills? So that, I think, is besides, I definitely think the parents need to do a better job. They might need some encouragement and maybe some training on how to, teach their kids and lead them in the right directions, which I think could be really tough. But at the end of the day, you got to keep the parents in the home.
Okay. You guys had opinions too, because I think all three of you were about to fire them up last week.
I definitely was. Coming from me, I'm a single mother, and I raised two children on my own. So I always established myself of making sure that they had a village type of mentality. If I can't be around, then at least my family is. But what I don't want to be assumed for is that I'm not a good parent because my child does something wrong. I mean, there's a lot of parents who work 3 jobs, 2 or 3 jobs, that have to take care of their child by themselves or their children by themselves. And sometimes you're not there enough to be a bigger influence on them. But I think that's where the community comes in. There's certain things that can be done for that. I don't think just going, okay, well, your child did this, let's lock you up too with them. I think that's kind of like making the problem even more greater. Because now who's going to be home with the other children that are coming behind them? Is it going to be that same following example? So I absolutely was definitely.
You were ready to jump on him.
Yeah, I was.
What about you? Did you have something you wanted to chime in with?
I did. I think it just plays into the whole narrative of over-criminalizing people for things that, they haven't done. We have to look at a couple factors. One being, well, what if a parent that Representative Mosby was talking about, is really trying to get to this kid, but they're just not getting it. I don't think that parents should be penalized for, actions of their children. Also, another point I wanted to bring up to him was the fact that there are a lot of children living with grandparents now. And, do we want to be locking up 70, 80-year-old woman for, not, raising these children in ways that, he may feel that they need to be raised. So I think there are a lot of questions and factors that need to be considered when, making statements like that.
Okay. David, would you have any comment that you'd like to?
Yeah, I won't defend that for sure. But I think you're right. I mean, already there's a system in place for seizing homes when a child has maybe brought drugs in and out of that home. And then the process is really disruptive because the law enforcement can seize that home, and then there's a long process to get that home back, and you have to be able to fund a lawyer, and a lot of people can't afford to do that. That's already a huge punitive thing. And I'd also, as a constitutional lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, I'd need to look at the constitutionality of that. I don't know that our United States Constitution and Bill of Rights would allow us to incarcerate someone else for the crimes of someone else.
Yeah. And my point, I agree with what you guys are saying, and I hate that Howard is not here because I hate beating him up when he's not present, but we did invite him to come back, and he can still come back at a later date if he wants to talk about it. But the reality is that we do need to find a way, because we do have juveniles that are committing crimes and being released to parents and then committing crimes again. So we do need to come up with some methodology or some way to address that problem. And we, in addition, we have situations where children are being influenced by people other than their parents. And so the question becomes, should we punish those people who are influencing these children to do bad things, even though they didn't, in fact, do the crime, but they've influenced the child to do the crime? Should they be somehow punished or incarcerated? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but clearly there needs to be some discussion and some solution to the problem of these children committing these crimes. And some of them are violent crimes. You know, I think there was an instance a couple of weeks ago where a 14 and a 15-year-old killed a man because they tried to rob him or something, or he asked questions about why they were doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing, and they shot him and killed him. So we can't have that. We can't have our children doing those kinds of things. And I would really like to see us look at what kinds of things are causing these children to turn to crime and see if we can do something about the conditions that cause them to turn to crime in the first place. So any last comments on that before we move on to another topic?
Yeah, I think
I
that
think we beat Howard up enough.
I think that there's a few nonprofits out there, Black Rose Foundation, and they do a parenting program, which basically brings parents in, teaches them, you know, how to look at, you know, what your kid's doing, how to balance the roles of, you know, going to work versus being home, and, you know, how to check on your kid's homework, and how to appropriately discipline your kid. That's actually safe and actually helping the kid so he learns about, you know, what he's done, what not to do, and a better step or a better way to do something next time. I think we need more programs like that, just out in the community, just because parenting isn't easy for everybody. That's the bad thing. It's not, you know, plus parents are getting younger and younger and younger, so it's not always being passed down from generation to generation.
Maybe I wonder if it would be appropriate to, just like before you can get your driver's license, that you have to take a test. And I'm wondering if, you know, before you become a parent, that you have to take a test of some sort. We're going to move on to another topic, okay? And if Howard comes back, then we'll let y'all beat up on him some more at the time. But let's talk for a minute, and I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart as well as mine, is around voting rights and making sure that we make it as easy as possible for people to go to the polls and cast their ballot with as much ease as possible. I'm honored to have my colleague David sponsor a piece of legislation with me to address the issue. I've already talked about it. Why don't I let you talk about it? So,
Representative Bruce, thank you for letting me sponsor that with you. It's something that I campaigned on, and I was so pleased to learn that you'd already taken the lead on it. But I do a lot of voting rights work. I've done a lot of voting rights work for about 12 years now. I headed up the voter protection teams for our statewide candidates in 2014 and for our last elections. One of the big things we find is people go to the wrong precinct to vote on election day. And if anybody's early voted, they know that you can show up to an early voting location, tell them where you live, they program a card, you take it to the machine, and your ballot for your precinct shows up right there. The technology is there to make that happen. But we find a lot of times when people move, either they're not very diligent about changing their address, or the Department of Driver Services doesn't catch up with it. There are a lot of precincts also that are closed and they're moved, sometimes on a short temporary basis, and there's no reason these people should be denied the right to vote. Because think about it, if you are on public transit, if you have child issues, if you have limited time off work, you go and you wait in line for over an hour, you've probably lost your right to vote that day because you can't get over to the other precinct.
that's exactly right.
And I think just on my experience alone, I think that would solve somewhere between 30 and 40% of all our problems on election day if we could get this legislation passed.
Right. And there was we did go, David and I went and talked to the Secretary of State, who oversees all of this stuff. And there was some concern expressed about the bandwidth, the ability for the Secretary of State's office to process all of those votes as they come in on election day. But, I'm still convinced if we can put a man on the moon and get him back here safely, then we ought to be able to deal with the bandwidth. And I know the Secretary of State didn't send them up to the moon, but the technology exists. And it works already during the early voting stage, so there's no reason why they just can't expand the bandwidth. But to make it palatable for everybody, what we decided to do is to make it where the counties can start doing this as they create the technology or develop the technology to be able to handle it. The second piece of it is that we agreed to allow the Kennesaw State University that processes a lot of the voting information for them to basically look at what the county wants to do and then validate that they are capable of doing what needs to be done to make sure that people don't vote twice, to make sure that people, cast their ballot in the right area. So there are safeguards put in place in the legislation. Was that your understanding of our meeting?
That's right.
Okay. All right. Now, what we're doing is in the process now of gathering signatures for it. That's what you've been doing.
Yes.
Talk about what's going on.
As I said last week, Democrats are ecstatic about this. We've, in a sense, led the fight on trying to make sure that voter rights are protected and expanded, in the state of Georgia. But there are Republicans who aren't opposed to this idea. They just have a hard time of signing on to it. So they're saying, well, we won't fight you on the legislation because it makes sense, but we just don't want our names attached to it just yet. So that's the main issue I've been running into. I've met with some senior Republicans, chairmen of committees, and people who have some standing within the party, and they don't seem to have an issue with this bill at all. The only thing is just they don't want their names attached
because
to it.
they didn't come up with the ideas that was going on.
Well, it's not so much they didn't come up with the idea, but it's more of a fear of, I think, the hierarchy within the party. And, well, I had one Republican say, well, this is going to go to Chairman so-and-so's committee, and, I don't know how far it's going to get, but, if it makes it there and it makes it out, I won't fight you on this.
Okay. Yeah. So it's internal politics that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments on that topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a question. Is it that what you were saying, or is it, some people want, people to vote for their, like there's precincts where they hold voting booths and things like that, and sometimes it discourages other people from going. So, depending what we're voting for, do people want to go in those places? So if we change it and there's voting everywhere, we don't have that issue going on versus somebody voting. They can vote wherever they want to versus going into places where, what if somebody had a warrant or something like that? They wouldn't want to go into a police precinct to vote for anything.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying, but
basically, if someone's voting, they can go into a voting booth or a police precinct to vote for something, and they have a warrant. They don't want to go in there versus.
Well, I don't know that we vote in the police precincts, and if they have a warrant, they're probably not overly concerned about voting.
I think what he's saying is that this past election cycle, there were some counties that actually moved precincts from one location, let's say a church or a school, to an actual police station as a form of.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The instance was a courthouse that also had a police precinct in it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's what he's referring to. If you're referring to that,
But that's kind of an isolated situation, isn't that? I mean,
there was, I believe, like one or two counties that had this incident, so it wasn't something that was widespread. Okay. And once the election lawyers got caught wind of it, they handled it.
They ran with it.
Yeah, they handled it.
Since you kind of raised an issue around voter suppression, I don't know that that's going to be a play in this. I do have other concerns. Since pre-clearance under the Voting Rights Act was eliminated, over 800 precincts have been eliminated in states that were covered by the Voting Rights Act and pre-clearance. So I think there are things we do need to pay attention to. But hopefully this is a convenience for every voter in Georgia, right?
I would think so. You know, anybody that has a job on one side of town and they vote on the other side of town, whether they're Democrat or Republican, it seemed like this would benefit them and help them. Um, I honestly don't see why anybody would be opposed to this. And quite frankly, I've talked to a number of people, and I have not really found anybody that was opposed to it, but you do have some political posturing going on, and hopefully we'll be able to get past the politics of it and look at it from purely, this is good for our citizens, whether you are Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter. We all want to vote, and we all want to be able to make it convenient for people to vote. Any last words on that one before we move on to
Yeah,
the
I
next
was
thing?
actually agreeing with the representative about the whole, sometimes they change precincts on you, and I've had so many people call me from this past election year who were saying they had to go to one precinct, and they said, okay, you're not in this precinct, you have to go to this one, and they'll go
Right.
to that one, and they said, well, you're not on this one either, you have to go back. Didn't even get a chance to vote because they spent so much time
Trying to figure out
going
where.
trying to figure out where their precinct was.
Okay.
And most of them happen to be in areas, not to say anything about voter suppression, but it's funny that most of these areas were mostly urban minority areas, like DeKalb County and some parts of South Fulton too. Like a lot of people were having problems with that.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that this would probably be the best for everybody with this bill, because who would want to feel like they wanted to put everything into it to vote, but felt like they were stopped at every turn?
Well, I guess to people that that see this video, just contact your legislator and let them know what your thoughts are. Your senator, your representative, and let them know what your thoughts are on this subject as we proceed through this session. Our last topic this morning is going to be around the legislation that was, I believe it was pre-filed, I'm not sure, but it's filed now, that would allow for the processing and growth of the cannabis oil, what they're calling medicinal marijuana here in Georgia. This came up before. It ran into some roadblocks last go-around, but it's coming back again. What are your thoughts on this whole issue around marijuana? Well, it's really the cannabis oil from the marijuana. I know that you set up an electronic survey. Tell what did you find out in the survey?
Well, so far on your page, because you said you wanted to just get the thoughts of your constituents before you actually made a decision on this
Right.
piece of legislation. So we just set up a simple survey, and we blasted it out to the people on your social media. And so far,
So it's gone out to what, a couple thousand?
yeah,
Three, 4,000?
Yeah, a few thousand people
Yeah.
so far. And so far, it looks like people are overwhelmingly supporting
They
the
want it
bill.
to happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So far, you have about 90% support for the bill. So what we did, we also attached the legislation so that people can actually read it, and framed it so that it wasn't just a kind of veiled question of do you support medical marijuana or the marijuana bill, but we actually put the legislation for people to read out there. And with that, you have about 90% support so far.
Okay. Has there been any discussion? Have you discussed this at all in your environment?
It's a big issue in my district. People are very in favor of this. And right now, talk about in-state cultivation, the General Assembly passed a bill to allow certain conditions to be treated with the cannabinoid oil, but there's no way to get the oil. So people are inherently breaking a state or federal law
By transporting it?
by transporting this to get this. So it would, I guess it's just a kind of an administrative thing to catch up with the legislation that was already done. And then my district's very supportive too, from the folks I've talked to. It's not uniform, but most people, I would say it's at least over 80%, to expand the conditions. This is, I think now that Representative Peake is looking to go after things like intractable pain and a few other things. And so I would be supportive of that as well.
What about the question, and it's come from some doctors, several of them, that if you don't have national guidelines for how you grow it, and the ingredients in it and the things that you can do with it, that it could be something different every time you purchase it, because you don't know what's in it. And if you are a medical doctor and you're a lawyer, so this is going to be a question you probably have to answer one day, or at least defend. If you're a doctor and you are treating somebody for some XYZ disease, and it requires you to give them some medicine, if you don't know, and they're also taking this medicinal marijuana, if you don't know what's in this marijuana, and you prescribe something that is in conflict with it and causes harm to the patient because of the mixture, who's liable?
It's a good question. I know that now they have a certain limit on the amount of THC that can be in that cannabinoid oil, and I think it's supposed to be low enough that it can't be intoxicating. So here it's super highly regulated in Georgia.
But that's Georgia.
That's right. I don't know what they're doing in other states.
Yeah, but if Florida is doing it a different way, and South Carolina and North Carolina is doing it a different way, and you're a doctor, you don't know where it came from. So if somebody is injured as a result of those medications not blending together, what happens?
I think there could be some liability for sure. I think that I haven't heard of any national problems, and they have full-scale legalization in several states now. And I think that's because marijuana is generally not it doesn't cause any kind of overdose conditions. So I think that might be kind of what's saving it from happening. But I'll be on the lookout for stories, but I haven't seen anything come out about any kind of long-term adverse consequences.
Okay.
Yeah, and mostly they're using. There's two parts of marijuana. There's the THC, and then there's the CDMA or the MD. What's the other word for it? Sorry, but the one is basically used for people who use it for medical purposes. That's control seizures and stuff like that. That there actually is more of that part of it than there is any THC, which is the effect that gets people high or whatever you want to call it. But that's probably why it's easier to kind of control it, because they're not using the THC part of it.
Okay.
They're just using the other part of the marijuana.
Well, it's definitely going to be up for discussion. The bill is coming back, and I think that we all have to at least listen to our constituents, see what their thoughts are on it, and that's why I asked for the survey to be done, and because it makes it easier to understand what the public wants. And that's why we're here. We're here to represent, our district. So we will see that as it goes forward. Look at the detail of the bill. As they say, the devil's in the detail. And we got to make sure that whatever we do, that we are protecting the health and safety of our constituents. Any last thoughts on anything before we wrap it up?
Just kind of on the cannabis bill, I think it has pros and cons, but what I do like about it is that as long as it's controlled and we tax it appropriately, that's definitely some more revenue coming into the state, rather that goes to schools or wherever that may be. But that definitely a potential to increase things in those areas, which I'm all for.
Okay. Any last thoughts from anybody?
I just think this has been a great discussion. Everybody's been so well informed. Thank you for having me.
Okay. And I can say with confidence that anytime you want to come on back, and we'll talk about some other things. There's going to be lots to talk about as we move forward. And I know you're new to this process, so get ready, because it's going to get wild. Thanks again for everybody coming and participating. I look forward to us getting together next week. We'll have some other things to talk about, the budget, that's what they were working on this week. And by now, probably, I don't know how many bills have already been introduced, but I suspect there's quite a few. And so we'll come back and keep everybody informed. If anybody is interested in keeping up with things between the time that we have these meetings or these gatherings, just go to my website, rogerbruce.net. And you'll be able to get an update on what's going on. Do you want to give any contact information?
Sure. My website is dreyerforgeorgia.com, DREYER for Georgia, all spelled out. And feel free to, all my contact information's on there. Feel free to reach out.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate
Thank
you
you.
coming again, and we'll see you next week.